managing these three? Are they digitally managed? Do you have the same database? Is everything seamlessly managed? Are you transparently able to see what you're doing? Because if you're not able to do this seamlessly, and this is all managed by different teams in different places through different platforms, handwritten, email, phone call, etc., etc., you will never be able to actually go and meet the requirement of a digitally integrated front end today, right? So I hope this kind of broadly answers, the reason for why sourcing organizations or sourcing functions in companies need to now become digitally managed, so that they can seamlessly align with the front end, which has become digitally aligned with the consumer. Thanks.
Yeah, great, Anindya. Thanks. Thanks for and one line that you mentioned was single source of truth. I think a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, single source of truth is extremely is sometimes difficult to get there. Everybody's got their own. It's sometimes you remember the story about everybody's trying to the blind man trying to figure out touching the elephant, what the elephant really looks like, and everybody's got their own version of what the elephant is like. So I think just having a single source of truth, especially in a very fragmented supply chain, is of great importance. Uh, I have wanted to ask you. I know people. I think a lot of audience out here would probably be knowing the importance of digital now, getting to understand it, especially in this current situation. Just wanted to understand, because I know you went through this journey you were actually in the trenches and actually working through this whole process in very detail. What kind of challenges did you face? And for anybody looking to implement it, how should companies go about doing this? That's a big question people sometimes have in their mind. Look, I'm convinced I want to go digital. It'll give me the benefits, but how do I make it happen? So any tips or any pointers you would want to share with the audience?
Oh yeah, that's a very, very interesting question, Guneesh. So, I'll also try and answer this, but probably in about two parts. Let me just see how it goes. Uh, so, what we did at Arvind is going to be the same that any other organization would face. But I will try and put it down in very simple manner. One, again, I will go back to the purpose aspect. When you're doing it, be very clear of the purpose, be very clear of the cost versus benefit that you're getting. Okay. Second is conviction of purpose. There must be conviction in the organization, or you have to build that conviction in the organization that this requires digitization, you need to digitize. Third is top management drive. So if it is not being driven by the top management, and if let's say the sourcing team is trying to drive it, or some other division is trying to drive it, they need to be able to convince the top management that it is very, very important for the organization to have this in place. Third is to put in place a rigorous review mechanism, and which is ideally driven by the top management, at least a fortnight or a monthly review of how the whole thing is going. Have very clearly outlined benefits and see if those benefits are flowing through. That is very, very important to any digitization process. And most importantly, digitization requires change in space. So I have had this very interesting thing where there is so digitization requires a lot of different stakeholders typically to get on similar platforms. So you may have your vendors connected, mills connected, designers connected. You may have multiple, your own team connected, quality connected. So to get everybody to do work the way you want it to work, you need to manage management at a very integral grounds up level. So while you have top management looking down and seeing what benefits are there, from a bottom up perspective, you need to drive change management. This becomes very, very important as well. So coming to the second part. So while I've defined what this is, how does one actually, go about overcoming these challenges? What does one do? So it is very important first to have a very, very clear vision. Okay. And the ability to articulate that vision very clearly to your team, to your stakeholders in terms of what you're doing and where you're going to get. If you're able to articulate and make them have the same vision, then it'll be much easier for the journey to happen. Second thing is, please make sure that when you're doing this, you choose the right partner. Okay. you have the right partner. Your technology partner who's working with you needs to be the right person. He should be able to understand your business, and he should be able to make things move for you, right? Third is you should have one should have very very clearly defined measurable outputs and with clear milestones. So don't have a milestone which is 3 years away. Please have a milestone where you can see a quarterly or a bi-monthly impact on your business. That way, if you are able to achieve these small milestones, it really helps in energizing the team and everybody along with you in terms of the fact that they're actually moving from one place to the other. Third, another very important thing is, in your teams, you should identify leaders who are going to drive this change for you, because you cannot drive these changes yourself. So in every team, whether it is your team, stakeholder teams, please make sure that you have people who are identified as change leaders for you, who are going to drive this change for you. And they should be rewarded or recognized and sufficiently incentivized to do so, right? And the other very, very important thing is, as you keep achieving milestones, please keep celebrating it and keep talking about it. It is very, very important to talk about milestones being achieved, because that really motivates teams to move forward. And the other thing that this does is, there is a normally a disconnect between how the at the ground level you are looking at digitization versus how at the top level you are looking at digitization. A lot of time people at the ground level look at it as more work. पता नहीं ये क्या डाल दिया हमारे सर पे, ये भी करना पड़ेगा, वो भी करना पड़ेगा. Why do I need to work in this way? Whereas at the top you're looking at only at, has my, what cost, what benefit am I getting, what is happening there. So it is very important to also bridge this gap and this understanding between how the top management looks at it and how you're looking at it at the ground level. If all this is managed together, then you can actually make this change really happen. So this is something that we did at our company, and yes, it was interesting. And of course, Gunish has been part of this journey with us for quite, I think, what, 2 years now, Gunish, and maybe he can share some more, throw some more light probably after this. But yes, if you ask me, that's how we were able to. Those are how you overcome these challenges.
Yeah,
Thanks,
man.
Gunish.
Just to Anindya, thanks. And I think just to add a couple of things, just from a software vendor perspective that we have seen, I think can't overemphasize the top management involvement. Change management is a very big and a big challenge, and it is not easy to change people's viewpoints. The benefit that COVID-19, the upside of it has been that today it has actually forced people to relook. People have become more receptive to change and to the fact that the world has changed. So I think in that respect, change management is, I can't even overstress that. Second, I think the fact that choosing maybe the low hanging fruits sometimes helps. So maybe selecting, and I think Anindya mentioned that in his, because I know when we were working with Arvind, I know how your team identified these are the first one or two areas you want to look at, and how we then went about integrating all the different pieces. So I think identifying what is that one or two key things initially you want to address, it becomes important, rather than picking up a very big chunk of the whole thing and then trying to address 10 things. So salami tactics, probably people saw as it's do it slice by slice and then improve. So maybe that's what I observed when I saw what you were working on.
Great. I mean, absolutely. That's a very, very well taken point here.
So okay, another question. What kind of tangible benefits can companies derive? I mean, what do you see uh, as some things that people could do on? And I would also add one more thing. Sometimes when people talk about digital, we've got SAP, we've got ERP systems. What is a digital platform is not really an ERP, right? It's more of an, I don't know what you call it, but you always keep telling it it's an operations ERP. But what kind of tangible benefits and what kind of things people should look at, or maybe benchmarks they could probably look at in terms of improvements that they could potentially get?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. So while I'm not in a position to share any exact data, but I'll give a fairly good idea in terms of what can be can be achieved through digitization. Very, very well taken point. Uh, okay, so but first I'll take off from where one thing which you said, in terms of an ERP. Uh, we always have this question on whether and I'm now specifically talking about digitizing the sourcing aspect of it. Okay, I'm not talking about multiple other aspects which you can digitize. I'll take it on later. But when you are digitizing the sourcing, okay, a common question is, what does it impact top line or bottom line? What does it do for you, right? The answer is actually it does impact both. But how it does is you need to break the top line and bottom line benefits that you will derive and understand what things within what you do or what you're delivering will help you achieve that. So, for example, if your deliveries are more on time, right, and they are more predictable. So, what is one of the most important thing in a sourcing platform? That you need to become more predictable and more dependable. Okay, any sourcing team has to be predictable and dependable so that the business teams that are actually managing the businesses can commit to their consumers products and they can deliver it to them when they want. Now, as you become more and more predictable and dependable, and if you can measure what you are doing versus how it changes after you have digitized, you will find that there is a delta improvement in sales as well. So that is how you can impact top line, right? Then, for example, look at the kind of workload that per person is handling. So let's say how many styles is a single merchandiser able to handle today versus if you were to digitize, can that person handle double that workload, triple that workload? How much of his work can you automate? So typically in a sourcing organization, there are two kind of things that you will look at. There is value added work and there is basic, what should I say, follow up work, which can also be automated or partly automated. So if digitization helps in reducing that aspect of the work, then your sourcing merchandiser or your sourcing team can focus more on value addition in terms of getting better costs or probably getting more innovations on board, and that can actually help a lot in terms of adding value to the organization. So one should also look at what is the workload change in the workload per person. Okay, the third thing that one should look at in terms of how digitization can impact is better governance. So what do I mean by better governance? For example, typically when in any sourcing function, negotiations are happening at multiple levels, multiple points. Data is maintained in multiple laptops. Do we have the same database? So supposing one merchandiser leaves, does the guy who's taking up from him know what costs were negotiated, what were the base costs required? Is there a regularized format or a single format in which you're capturing all your costs? Is there a comparison between the costs? So if you're changing vendors, do you know what part of, so let's say you go to another vendor and he gives you a cost which is 10 rupees less, but do you know why that is 10 rupees is reduced? Which aspect of cost is he reducing? Why were you not able to have gotten it before, or can you get it somewhere else? So these are multiple questions which get lost over a period of time as people keep changing. So how do you, if when people change, how do you actually keep that knowledge within your organization, which actually helps in better governance, gives you more transparency. The finance team is able to actually see what kind of costs you're doing, how you're negotiating, what kind of costs you're maintaining, whether orders are coming on time or not coming on time. Are the orders that are coming on time, do they have enough data for you to actually action the order? So I have had multiple times when I've had businesses coming to me saying this order has been delayed, that order has been delayed, and we have actually gone back and looked at it. We have seen that a lot of times this is because sufficient data was not. So sometimes you forget to mention what trim fabric. What do I mean by data? Or you don't know which buttons to use or which trim fabric to use. Some things are not specified. Costs are not closed. So do we have visibility of this in the whole chain? Because unless and until we do, you can never become dependable and predictable, right? So how do you have a single source of truth which actually then leads to better governance? The fourth thing that we should look at is improved speed to market. Yeah. So what do I mean by improved speed to market? So typically what is happening today, more and more if we see, forecasting is becoming very, very difficult. As time is progressing, in the earlier days, people used to forecast seasons, manufacture for a season. You would have orders coming in 6 months in advance, 5 months in advance, and then you would manufacture it and deliver it. Today, we are unable to predict how consumers are going to be behaving. And what is happening is a lot of businesses across the world are switching to what we call demand-led supply, which means you supply what is in demand rather than you supply what you've planned to supply. Okay, so from moving from a forecast-based supply management to a demand-based supply management requires tremendous improvement in speed to market. So until and unless speed to market is dramatically improved, and how do you? So even if, when you, a lot of times when I'm talking to organizations in within India itself, I realize they don't know. So if you ask them what is your average lead time, they won't even be able to tell you. Is it 90 days? Is it 60 days? Is it 120 days? How many days does it take to make? So actually having measurables like that, seeing the improvement, and then seeing the impact of this on sales, right? And I think one of the other things which it really does, I know it's a small thing, but at the ground level this has a huge impact, is it takes away a lot of unnecessary issues that arise between internal teams itself. You will have design teams fighting with product teams, fighting with sourcing team, fighting with quality team, fighting with vendor. I mean, the five stakeholders will keep cribbing and fighting, and this wastes huge amount of time. In fact, one of the things, one of the first benefits I remember when we did this, I think there was a reduction of almost 20% of the time that our team spent on doing stuff like this. Unnecessary. I mean, you will have a debate, then somebody will go to his laptop, search out 20 mails. It'll take half an hour doing it just to prove that nahi, you did not give me this data on time, or no, I did give you this data on time. And this thing completely gets eliminated. In our organization it looks, I mean, we've kind of forgotten what these things were, but I remember a few years back, these were huge issues for us. And this takes a lot of man hours. So when you look at all these, I'll just summarize, to just explain what I just said. You need to look at higher workload per person. Is it happening? Okay. Is it saving time? Does it give you better governance? Is it giving you improved speed to market? And is it reducing time wasted on unnecessary justifications? And all these together should have a definite impact on your top line or bottom line, right? One other thing which I, in fact, very, very highly, I've not mentioned here, but which is very, very important, is to also look at cost. There is nothing like having a digital platform to manage your costs, because if you have a digital platform managing your cost, you can compare cost between the last 4 years, last 3 years, last 2 years, between vendors, on category, cluster of costs. This is something which takes a lot of time and effort to do. I have had cases where my team members come back to me and say, "Sir, dekhiye, we have reduced this cost now." So when you actually look at data, you realize the cost has actually gone up, but nobody is actually monitoring that data. Okay, but somehow the vendor is convinced everybody that cost has come down. So it's unbelievable how much having data in place can do for your day-to-day management and day-to-day working of the organization. I hope I've touched upon all the points. There are more, and I'm sure Gunish can touch upon some things if I missed. So over to you, Gunish.
Anindya, thanks. And I think you've quite well summarized some of the benefits. One of the benefits that I have seen companies sometimes, just to add, and maybe at the expense of maybe repeating some of the things you've mentioned, have been that some of the things which were ad hoc could actually be planned a little bit better. I think visibility is a very important thing. So again, going back to single source of truth and visibility, preparation of data that I noticed used to takes a lot of time in companies, actually gets eliminated. And finally, I think one of the biggest changes was integration of vendor into your working. So the interaction with the vendor, once it becomes digitized, it is a challenge, of course, to getting so many stakeholders on a single platform. but I think getting the vendors to be digitized and on your platform makes it much easier, I saw, in terms of coordination with them, and actually in being able to work rather than as a disaggregated, like a working in silos. People were really working as a more integrated unit, not only internally but as well as with their vendors. So that's one benefit which I saw, um, which probably has a huge
No,
impact.
no, absolutely. That's very well taken.
Okay.
Thanks, Manish. Yeah.
Right. So I think we've got quite a few questions coming in, Anindya. So I don't want to hog too much of time, but I will ask you a few questions which have come up so far. So we've got one question. Somebody saying, are we talking about intelligent SAP systems when you talk about single source of truth? Uh, how do we, sir, shouldn't the final target be a single source of truth for organization from sales to sourcing? So what would you talk about what do you mean by a single source of truth? Maybe if you could touch upon it maybe to 2 minutes, in case it's not clear to anyone.
uh, yeah. So no, I think there are three questions in what you said, and each one of them is very very interesting. So one of the things I have seen is that earlier the approach to digitization was to have very large ERP platforms which would technically take care of all your needs. Okay, but what happens is when you have very very large programs, ERP programs like SAP and all running, they tend to become mammoth, and you cannot really justify niche functions and functionalities in that. You can have a certain base level of uniformity in terms of information and data flow in the in the business. So it becomes very very important for certain functions to have very evolved and very specific softwares that actually manage what they do, and which then tie into SAP so that your whatever ERP you're running, so that the data flow is seamless. But you cannot expect an SAP to manage your design function or your sourcing function, or let's say your planning function. It is very very difficult because every organization is dealing with multiple issues, and which are, some of them are probably unique to that organization. So to have a single ERP is very very difficult. Issue number two, the question is, what do you really, which Gunesh, you asked, is what is really a single source of truth. So what happens is, while financial data may appear to be very, very well defined, but there are multiple other data points which are not. For example, when you say, let's say I'll speak from a sourcing point of view. Uh, if somebody says, but I gave you the order on this date, why it's been 90 days and why have your goods not come in? But the single source of truth will tell you whether the order that came in had sufficient data points within that order for you to actually manufacture the order, right? I have been into meetings where, for example, let's say one of your channel partners, one of your digital channel partners, or somebody has simply said, I need so many, t-shirts to be delivered on this date. Now if you're in a meeting like that, and now what happens is, fundamentally your business team or your sales team thinks, I have given this information actually to my product team, and hence mera kaam ho gaya, ab mujhe 60 din mein ye maal chahiye. But how much time has it taken the product team to actually create a tangible order? Because to create a tangible order from that whole thing, it takes time. You need to have design, fabric, color, everything specified and told to the vendor for the vendor to go and organize it. So now assume that it takes 15 days, so that 60 days has then become 45 days. Okay, now for the vendor to further negotiate, or you to then further negotiate with 4 or 5 vendors, कि कहाँ पे मैं order करूँ, may take another 5 days. 45 days has become 40 days. For the vendor to then actually negotiate his raw material takes another 5 days. So now 60 days has become 35 days, right? So the person in the sales team is actually thinking, मैंने तो 60 दिन दे दिया. Okay, and he is very convinced about it. Okay, but that is not the truth for the vendor. Vendor's truth is, मेरे को तो भाई 35 दिन मिला, मैं कैसे माल बनाऊं? Okay, so this is what is meant by the single source of truth, because then what it does for everybody is it brings these measurements absolutely bang on and makes it clear for everybody in the system, so that as time progresses, everybody talks the same language. Everybody knows how much time is being taken in all these various activities, and what does it mean for the business. So when I take an order, what should I have prepared my thing before I went to my channel partners to get an order? Should I have had done some pre-work? Should I have had some designs already ready so that when I got an order, I quickly actioned it out? How would you know to do all this unless you're measuring it? And how will you measure it if you're not on a digital platform? It becomes very, very difficult. So this, in a sense, becomes the single source of truth in the way that we talk about it, because this is not measuring financial parameters, billing values, GRN values. Those are separate things that will always remain standard and managed by ERP. But the functionality of how this looks at it and how every single team in the supply chain looks at the same business is very, very different. And unless you align everybody's views to a single point of view, it becomes very difficult. So I hope this kind of answers the question. The third thing on here, the third thing I would quickly touch upon here is the fact that this is while large ERPs can manage this, but let's say different pieces for different parts of the organization are differently managed, and you need specialized softwares for that. And unless you have that in today's world, I think it is not going to be easy to react to reality and market changes the way we were doing. Sorry, over to you, Gunesh.
Okay, great. I think Anindya, thanks for I think giving that example. I think we all in the industry sometimes fight with this example of what is actual number of days left or how many days was actually given. A lot of questions are there, so I'm going to try and ask maybe raise 3-4 questions together so that you could probably answer them. And so there was one question which was, how can this system digital sourcing, or how can this digitization help in this COVID situation? So that was question number one. Another one, and then there's somebody asked very specifically, how is blue cactus versus PLM? And also, how can this platform or digitization help in tracking customer pulse? Another question that was there, so maybe I'm asking 2-3 together, was in COVID-19, they really want to implement something very quickly in 2-3 months. They need a result in 2-3 months. And usually putting the whole system in together takes about a year or so, as per their experience. So what is it that they can realistically expect to implement in a 2-3 month period? That's another question. And finally, there's a question also, another one, and there's quite a few others. So in case, guys, I'm not able to get through your questions, we will make sure we'll have Anindya maybe answer them offline. Is how can vendors, what kind of platforms are available, and how can vendors help in this? How can a supplier orient himself to digital sourcing? So maybe I've asked a few too many questions, Anindya, together, but maybe if you could answer them in whatever order.
I'll try. So if I forget a few questions in the middle, please remind me. I'll
yes,
try.
Sir.
So I think we started with talking about COVID and how digitization will help. So actually, companies that moved on the digitization platforms before COVID will be at a slight advantage, because one of the things that COVID will do is fundamentally it will not allow people to travel too much. So you like sending your quality teams to audit in factories, or to have your team members go to other factories, have factory people come to your office and show samples. A lot of this is not happening anymore. People are really scared. I mean, this is talking from what is happening in the market virtually today. So what needs to really happen is look at how digitization can help you manage in a disaggregated manner. Look at how companies can manage things from a distance, which means sitting in one place. For example, let me just take a small example. So sitting in a single place, can you manage quality across India? So let's say you have 150 factories or 120 factories or 80 factories or whatever the number of factories. Okay, but today you are not in a position to maybe send your QAs to audit in multiple locations. Can you have a platform that allows you to manage your quality audit processes, your quality processes in a disaggregated manner, which allows you to then let the vendor do some of the work, but in a way that is completely transparent to you? Are you able to, for example, see videos of it? Can you actually, get them to manage quality the way you were doing? How do you do it? Because today you are not able to. A lot of companies, for example, who are working with low cost vendors, vendors are in, very, not a very organized vendor setup. How do you manage quality if you're not on these kind of platforms? Because today is the time that you need to build trust with the vendors on goods. You cannot go and monitor everything that is happening. So you have to trust your vendor. But it's easier to trust your vendor when you have data, right? And when you have consistent data and you know what they're doing. Otherwise, it is blind trust. And if something goes wrong and you're not talking with the vendor, then you will get, unfortunately, you'll get very disappointed with the results that you have. I think the another question which I remember is, I hope that kind of got answered. Another question I remembered was, which you asked, is about PLM versus Blue Cactus. So I just want to, it's a very interesting question. What does PLM do actually? So PLM is a product lifecycle management system, which is extremely focused more towards development than towards the production part side of it. Okay, most PLM spend inordinate amount of time or huge amount of time telling the designers ki kaise library banao. Designers have to then use that library to design. They will push designers to work in a particular way with only certain software which they are aligned to, and then that information will flow into the system, etc. Yeah. Now what happens is, there is a, design is not a function that is very, very, it's not like a factory. I mean, you cannot manage design functions like factories. So you have to give designers some amount of space and time to work. Now, if you're doing that, you have to give them some space, which means you have to have systems that allow you to manage your sourcing, your quality, and things like that, on a absolutely ground level, without actually having to impact with the designer, allowing the designer to do what they want. I think to that extent, this is, Blue Cat is a far more sourcing, quality focused business that ties into any PLM that you need. So it's two different functionalities really. I would not really talk about it. Sometimes you could call it a softer PLM. It gives more flexibility to design teams to work on a thing like Blue Cactus, but it allows much greater transparency and visibility to all the other stakeholders when it comes to business.
Okay.
Sorry, so any other questions?
Yeah. So
No,
there is one
I
question, very interesting question about pre-season activity. So one of the questions is that one of the biggest challenges is to digitize the pre-season presentation by suppliers or brands towards retailers and channel partners. With trade shows and large gatherings not happening in near future, how do you see this getting resolved?
ah. Oh, this is a very interesting question. Can I? I'll take a few minutes on another topic, then I'll move to this. So,
Okay.
it's very, very interesting because what companies need to do is really look at in which areas are they digitizing. Okay, what are the various things they're digitizing? For example, some places where you can digitize very effectively. For example, budgeting can be digitized, demand planning can be digitized, supply planning can be digitized. So the planning can be digitized very, very effectively. And this has both a top line and a bottom line impact. Huh? Then the other thing, for example, you can do it is look at predictive analytics. Okay. Can you predict how much it's going to sell or how it's going to perform? Or, can you predict how much time it is going to make to manufacture the goods? Because if you have predictive analytics in place, it actually helps you do your planning and your deliveries better. Third thing, for example, is look at trend capturing. So you have softwares today which actually, at least they claim to, and there I'm sure they will get there in some time with greater effectiveness. But which claim to tell you, they will tell you what trends are happening on the go, right? And they can tell you what kind of trends are happening. This helps you guide your designers in terms of what they should design. But very, very interestingly, and I'll come to the other two platforms which are there, and then I'll come to the question that was asked. The third, for example, the next thing which is very important, another area which needs to be looked at is actually looking at the whole development cycle itself. And how do you do that? You do it through 3D design. So 3D is emerging as a very, very major game changer in the industry. Okay, making virtual samples, showcasing it virtually, and I'll talk about that as an answer to this, is becoming extremely important going forward. The fourth, which again requires a tremendous amount of work, is actually the sourcing, quality, compliance, the governance, speed to market, and bottom line. These have direct impact on the bottom line issue, which I spoke about earlier. Okay, but to go back to the question on how roadshows need to happen and this thing, so one needs to seriously start looking at 3D softwares today. while not everything lends itself well to 3D, but there are numerous categories which do, right? And those categories, one needs to actually look at how one can do design on 3D. One, how can those be presented? Can you create, a separate platform which is allowing you to have independent views from your, channel partners? Can they comment, rate, tell you how much they like it, not buy it? And this is much faster. So today, any development process takes anything between 60 to 90 days to minimum to prepare for a roadshow. Whereas with 3D you can actually virtually do it, month on month, week on week if you need, category by category, apply different rules, and that and create platforms where you do. Today you have platforms where you can actually do virtual roadshows. In fact, there are platforms where you can take on an avatar, actually enter a roadshow, try on some of the garments on display. So there are very evolved software that allow you to do it. But simplistically speaking, I think 3D is going to change the way business is being done. People do not need to. So there may be certain new fits or new products, new innovations which will still require physical sampling. But to do basic shirts, t-shirt, graphic tees, polos, jeans, a whole lot of this is slowly now shifting to 3D. Okay, and this is giving a huge opportunity for organizations to move very quickly to market. I hope that answers the question. If that was
Okay.
anything, sorry, the next question.
Yeah. I'll ask two questions together.
Yeah.
They're although not very connected. So first is there was few questions which were about the fact that digitization sometimes takes too long. So थक जाते हैं लोग कई बार and they go through that journey. Can what can be done quickly? Maybe what are the areas? Maybe low hanging fruits you
Yeah.
could suggest. Uh, Second was how can vendors help in digital sourcing? So maybe if you could talk about, because I see a lot of vendors and factory people are also there on this webinar. So how can vendors enable and be participants in the digital sourcing journey?
Oh, absolutely right, Gunish. Very relevant. So on the first thing, it's very important to whenever you're doing a large digital transformation piece, not to do everything at one shot. And look at results 3 years down the line, which we were talking about. Look at results. So do bits and parts. Identify parts. For example, let's look at the sourcing function. For example, the quality function. Can it be digitized? Can audits be digitized? Can quality management be digitized? Okay, and can that happen within, let's say, 1 month, 2 months? Okay, then look at how, for example, let's say your production monitoring processes in terms of your daily production reports, etc. Reviews, can they shift to an online platform? Okay, then subsequently look at taking the development aspect on it. So you can do it in bits and parts, and you can digitize bits and parts and then bring it all together, rather than looking at a large piece that will digitize everything. But very important, of course, in this whole thing is also making sure data integration is reasonably good with your and robust with your main ERP system, because then that will help reduce work. For example, even look at how goods go to warehouses. Is that digitized? So there are multiple things that are happening. For example, when goods are leaving your factory to goods are reaching your warehouse, is there follow up required from your sourcing team? If it can you digitize that whole follow up process? Is it just something that you really don't need to do, something that can be managed digitally? So take little bits, identify those ones, and very quickly do it, and then get the larger picture in play. That is one of the things that I would advise, and something that we've tried doing ourselves, when we were doing it. I think the second question was on Gunish.
Vendors, how
Yeah,
can
how do
vendors
vendors?
be participants in this digital journey?
Yeah. So this actually becomes very important. To answer this question, we should first actually understand what are companies looking for from vendors. What do companies expect vendors to give them? Yeah. So companies are expecting simply 2-3 things. ज़्यादा नहीं मांगते हैं. उनको बस ये चाहिए कि ये dependable है vendor. जब commit करता है वो माल देता है. Does he give deliveries when he commits, and does he meet it every time? So is he consistent with his timelines? Is he giving you quality? Is he dependable on his quality? Is he giving you a good cost? Yeah. And then is it transparent? Because what happens is a lot of unnecessary problems happen if there is lack of transparency between vendor and the company that he's working with. Because when you don't have transparency, the company knows exactly what it's doing. It is able to manage their customers better. Okay, but when there is lack of transparency, what happens is companies don't understand कि अरे माल आएगा नहीं आएगा, मैं कस्टमर को क्या बोलूं, वो माल जाना था नहीं जाना था, how much time do I do? So you need to have reasonable amount of transparency built into the system. Now vendors need to understand that this is today's reality, and in today's the other reality that is happening with COVID and work from home becoming very very real things. I think the responsibility of quality, delivery, etc., is going to be more and more left to vendors. I do not think the kind of sourcing teams having to drive vendors is going to be the norm going forward. Vendors who are going to do well are vendors who are going to have their own dashboards, allow companies to log in and see what kind of where the orders are, what is happening on their orders, what is the quality status on their orders. Because the more that the vendor actually digitizes and allows customers to look into their business, is how well and more dependable and more orders the vendor is going to get, because the customer feels safe that yes, the vendor knows what he's doing and I don't need to put my man behind chasing the vendor. Because as time progresses, I do not think companies are going to invest in having large teams that are going to chase vendors and sit in their factories and get things done. That is in the past. I really don't think in the next 3 years you will even see that happen.
Okay,
So,
great.
simply put, yeah, just vendors need to just make sure that they're transparent and digitized to allow. Of course, the benefits to vendors in terms of their own ERP. Sorry, there's another point which I would like to mention here is we work with a lot of factories, and for years we've been working with a lot of factories, and we have seen that factories that do their planning very very well and they have ERPs in place, they do their planning, are way more efficient in managing their own cost, keeping costs down, and making sure that deliveries etc go on time. So from that aspect also, if you look at it, factories that move to managing their whole internal processes through ERPs or simpler process, products that help them do their planning, monitoring, etc., will also do extremely well going forward. Sorry, over to you, Kunish.
Oh, great, Anindya, and I think just to add to some of the points that you've mentioned, that it's important, that vendors obviously can get onto a platform. I think a platform like Blue Cactus, where vendors can just get in one license and just being able to upload their DPRs, upload their status, and actually get a dashboard of what's happening with respect to their customer, makes it easier for them to track and understand what's happening. Of course, it does require training, it does require intent, but what I have seen is that such platforms and such sourcing platforms are really, I think, they are vendor driven in the sense, because the real action is happening at the vendor side. The goods are coming there, they are being manufactured there. So I think if vendors can be very proactive and be very good at looking at their data, I think they can become preferred vendors with brands. And I think that's what you've always talked about, how transparency is so important when we're talking to vendor factories. I know we've got only 3 more minutes left, so I think we're trying to wrap up the whole session. There are quite a few other questions. I apologize to anybody who have not asked for their questions or have not raised their questions. Somebody's asked about, can the software be connected to marketplace for sourcing fabrics with several mills or receive quotations? Maybe I could answer that question. So we have a platform called Collab, and Blue Cactus Collab, where mills and vendors can actually put out their products, get quotations, interact with the brand, etc., and interact with multiple companies and multiple brands, and actually be able to generate business and even mention their stock, lead times, etc. So for anybody interested in that, we'll be happy to share information with respect to that. I think that's, let me see if there's one space for one last question, Anindya, but we'll have to keep it very short because it's 12 o'clock. Uh, You mentioned that as a factory, we need to let clients access our ERP. We are okay with that, but each retailer has his own systems and each wants his reports in his format. And having multiple formats and reports just increases our work. So that's a dilemma which a lot of vendors do face, Anindya, because Arvind will ask for one format, X will ask for another format. What should factories do? Any thoughts?
I think what factories can do. So there are two ways to look at it. There will be customers who have their own systems. So they will probably just integrate with the vendor ERP and look at the data in formats they want to. And in cases that there are not, I think the factory should look at making certain dashboards, okay, in whatever format is which they feel they can collaborate with a couple of their customers and see if it is making sense for them and show them that data and then tell them that at least this is what we're offering you. Just log in and see the state of your orders. I mean,
Okay.
even that itself is good enough because very few people are not doing this. And if I may just add one little point, I think I think going forward, how I see this moving in the next few years is I see that there is a opportunity because you mentioned the collab platform that you're on. I think the opportunity is there for having a single platform that is today connecting multiple stakeholders, whether it is mills, customers, trim vendors, fabric vendors, FG vendors, everybody on a single platform, even designers, etc., on a single platform that really allow sourcing on a single click. I mean, I think really that is the future going forward. Thanks. Over to you, Gunesh.
Great, Anindya. Thank you. And thank you for a fantastic session. It was I found it riveting and I found it very interesting. Some of the insights you gave. I know we've had discussions in the past, but I think some of the points you raised were actually eye openers for me as well in terms of looking at it from end to end. You talked today about why go digital and how do companies can go about looking at digital and look at sourcing specifically. How can they maybe go digital and what kind of benefits can happen, especially in this new COVID situation. I'm afraid we've run out of time, and I think we're already over 1 minute over our time limit. So I wanted to thank all the participants, whoever was there. I thought it was a very informative, great session. I think we learned a lot from what Anindya discussed today. And any last thoughts, Anindya? And I would also like to mention one final thing is that go to the blog Anindya has. It's called insideapparel.net. You will find a lot of things that some of the things Anindya has talked about. There's a lot more detailed things mentioned there as well. So I think there's a wealth of knowledge. Please log in there and look at it. It's insideapparel.net. Any last closing comments, Anindya, and then we can.
No, thank you very much, Gunesh, and I want to thank all the panelists for actually taking out time to listen to us. It's been absolutely an amazing this thing. I would request Gunesh, in fact, to share some of the comments, and if possible, I will also try and address questions we haven't addressed over emails. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you again.
Right. Thanks, everyone, and we look forward to next time getting you guys on there for another webinar on our series in excellence in apparel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.